I'm standing in my kitchen today because I don't have access to a gunsmithing shop, and I have a gun that needs to be reblued. Fortunately, the kitchen has the only thing that we need to successfully reblue a gun, which is a way to heat boiling water. This is the gun in question, a Mauser HSc that you may have seen in other videos. I bought it from a store very cheap, but very rusted and pitted, and it desperately needed to be refinished. Now, in one of my past videos, you've seen me strip the bluing and the rust from this using nothing but household vinegar in this same kitchen right here, and today we're going to reblue it with Mark Lee's Belgian Express Blue No. 1. While we're over here, let's take a look at the items that we're going to be using. I'm going to place links to some of these items in the video description below, and some of those links are affiliate links, which means if you follow them and purchase a product, whether it's the item I recommend or not, I will receive a small commission at no extra charge to you. So this is a great way to support the channel and the site, potsprecision.com, as well as get any products that you see here if you'd like to try this at home. This is the formula we're going to be working with, Mark Lee Express Blue No. 1. Now this is a take on rust bluing. Rust bluing formula works by encouraging the raw steel to rust. You then boil the rusted steel, and the heat from the boiling converts the red rust to what we know as black oxide. Rust bluing formulas historically are very toxic and slow working, and the Mark Lee Express Blue formula, which might also be referred to as Belgian Blue, actually fixes both of these problems. It is non-toxic, and as well, it does not have to be let to sit for a very extended period of time to work, so this is something that we're able to do in a single day without the use of a sweatbox. We have a cheap paintbrush for applying the formula. I looked for an acid brush, but Walmart didn't have one, so this is what I had. You can also use a cotton applicator or a fresh sponge. Obviously we have the gun parts over there. That's everything that's going to be blued today. And we have this right here, which is distilled water. This is very cheap, like 90 cents a gallon at Walmart. And the reason we need distilled water is because household tap water can have a number of minerals and other impurities that can affect the bluing process. This is why you hear about old gunsmiths collecting rainwater in wooden barrels and things like that. Today we just use distilled water because we know what we're getting with it. This is a small pail for painting. I'm going to use this to soak the parts in degreaser. This is just to hold the degreaser in the parts. It doesn't matter what you use. A little bit of wire for hanging and suspending the parts. A carding brush from Brownells. This is stainless steel, and it is specifically designed for this purpose. Essentially what's going to happen is when we convert the rust, we're going to have a little bit left over, and we're going to need to card it off, and that's what's going to leave us with that nice blue finish. If you don't have one of these are pretty cheap, by the way. I think this one was like $4 or $5. You can use quadruple aught steel wool. It has to be quadruple aught so that it doesn't scratch the finish. Or you can also use a stainless steel carding wheel that goes on a powered grinder. That's not something that I have here, so this is what I'm using. Nitrile gloves, not only to avoid getting the chemicals on your hands, but also because the oil on your finger will contaminate the process, and it will leave us with poor results. So once we get these parts degreased, we will not touch them with our bare hands. A little serving cup. You never want to apply the formula straight out of the bottle because you will contaminate it, and this stuff's not cheap. I think I paid like $40 for the whole container. So if I want to be able to use it multiple times, I'm going to pour it into this small plastic serving cup, and that way it should cover many guns, and we're not going to risk contaminating the whole batch. Denatured alcohol is what I like to use as a solvent. I've tried a lot of things. I've tried acetone, mineral spirits, even straight kerosene. Denatured alcohol, I find, does not have an obnoxious chemical smell. At least it doesn't affect me the way the other ones do. It dries very fast, it's clean, and I find it's very effective for removing grease. You can find this in the camping section or painting section. This is used to clean glass as well as to fuel camping stoves. So I think 1 quart of this was like $5, and I got a couple just to make sure we're going to have enough for this. Finally, a stainless steel stock pot. Stainless steel for obvious reasons, because we are trying to encourage rust and we don't want anything to rust during the process. Now, I went out and bought a brand new one for this, and it's going to be clearly labeled afterwards that this is for gunsmithing experiments and not for cooking. The Markley formula does say it's non-toxic. However, I'm not going to be eating out of this pot. I don't recommend you do either. How you live your life is up to you, but I'm going to keep this separate from all the other cooking utensils. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get the distilled water boiling, just so we're taking care of that while we get everything else set up. This is not a large pistol, and 1 gallon should be more than enough. You want to have enough water to account for evaporation during the process and to submerge all of the parts that you're working with completely. You can do it piece by piece, but I'm not a fan of that. And since we're only using this method for pistols, a small stock pot like this is going to be plenty. So we now have our pail filled with 1 quart of denatured alcohol, and you'll notice from this point on I'm wearing gloves. This stuff I feel is relatively safe, but there's no reason to come in contact with it barehanded. And as well, we're going to start handling the critical stages now, so it's just a good time to get your gloves on. Let's make a note about denatured alcohol. It is flammable. It is used for stoves. Therefore, if you're doing an old-timey gunsmith thing over an open fire, or you're using a propane torch, as we'll discuss in a minute, don't put it around your denatured alcohol. Let's be safe about that. There's no reason for anybody to get hurt over gun refinishing when we have plenty of safe ways to do things. So we're going to start by submerging the parts in the alcohol. We'll kind of slosh them around a little bit, squish them around. Now this gun has been degreased previously, so there shouldn't be anything left, but this is a critical step because dirt can always accumulate and it will ruin the finish process. I'm going to add a little more denatured alcohol just to make sure we can submerge the parts completely, just for peace of mind. This stuff is pretty good at degreasing. I've used this in a lot of machine shops and for bluing, both hot salt bluing and rust bluing. So I've just come to become fond of working with it. It is relatively quick drying. Of course, I have paper towels down here, but just like rubbing alcohol or even acetone, it evaporates pretty quickly. And while we let the brushes soak, I'm going to break open the Express Blue and pour a usable amount into the cup here. And that golden yellow liquid almost looks like a heavy cider or a very flat beer, is what we're going to be applying to the metal to encourage it to rust. So while we wait for the water to heat up, let's talk about what it is that we're doing here. Carbon steel easily oxidizes, and this is a problem because the oxidation creates rough surfaces and it begins to pit the metal and eat it away, and it's just not good in general. So what was done preemptively for many centuries, starting back in the 14th century, was these guns were actually encouraged to rust and then were gently carted away layer after layer. And what this did was it created a consistent layer of essentially controlled rust that kept a uniform finish on the gun and didn't leave open iron molecules for further rust to easily form. You can see this in guns like the Brown Bess, which gets its name because it was rust-browned or russeted. Somewhere along the way, it was discovered that if you activate the rust with energy, such as applied through boiling water or steaming, you turn the red oxide, hematite, into black oxide, magnetite. And this is a thicker, more easily controlled, and typically a much more attractive finish. So this is what we're doing here today. We're creating an even layer of the hematite rust and then we're converting that to the magnetite black oxide. Today, this is typically done with caustic salts that are heated up to around 300 degrees. The metal is left to sit for an hour or so in them, and that creates the hot bluing that we know today. But before that was discovered, and certainly in the time that this World War II era Mauser HSc pistol was created, the guns were rust blued, which was a very labor and time intensive process. While we wait for the water to boil, let's talk about surface preparation. So the bluing, typically, more true of hot salt blue than rust bluing, but still true in general, is that it is reflective of the finish that you put on the metal before it is blued. In this case, the only thing that I've done is to remove the old finish, and I'm going to treat it exactly as it is. Now let's see if I can focus. This gun was fairly pitted. So the right thing to do for a proper full refinish of this gun would be to go through and file all of the pits flat. In this case, it might even be better just to surface grind them if you had a surface grinder, because there's so many and they're so deep. I'm not essentially happy that I'm having to redo this gun because it is, let me show you. That eagle right there, and on the other side, the very faint eagle with the in, you can see this is a Nazi-issued, Waffenamt-proofed HSc from 1944 that was issued in Germany, most likely to an officer, likely somebody in their military police, but I don't know for sure. And the reason that I am redoing this, I'll include some pictures, is it was so abused when I got it that the serial number even could not be read at the gun store to put it on the 4473. They had to have multiple employees come and fight over what the serial number was because it just couldn't be read. So I'll post some pictures of that. But essentially, I just want to redo the blue finish to secure the gun, because if the pitting had been left alone, it was going to continue to eat the gun away, and the gun was not going to function and was going to end up destroyed. So rather than go back and repolish everything, I'm really just going to focus on redoing the bluing and pretty much leaving it as is. There might be other projects down the road where I'll completely redo the metal prep, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, the water's getting up to a boil now. We're at the part where we can put the pieces in for the first time to let them heat up. Going to gently lower them in by the wire, that's why we have it. And then lay the wire over the pot so that it can be grabbed without touching the pot or the water. And if we need to, we also have these pliers that we can grab the wire with to remove the parts. So why are we doing this? Well, the first step is to heat the metal parts, and that's where the propane torch that I told you about earlier comes in. One of the ways you can heat the parts is with a propane torch, just to warm them, because hot metal will oxidize more readily, and that's what we're trying to get it to do. We're trying to get it to oxidize in a controlled manner. Now, it's my speculation that at one point this would have been done by a process called wanding, where they would take a large steel or iron block and heat it to cherry red, which could be well in excess of 1,000 degrees, and would hold it over the parts to heat it. At least I know that that's how they cured certain other chemicals used in gunsmithing, such as aquafortis. But in this case, we're just heating with the water. That, to me, seems to be the safest way to do it with our setup. I suppose I could also use the toaster oven, but I really don't want to use any regular cooking implements here. Okay, so the first part is coming out of the pot now. I'm going to start with the slide, and I'm going to try not to block this shot, but no promises. So carefully and gently we're going to remove it. Lay it down. We can see it's nice and steamy. Carefully I'm going to blot it with the shop towels to dry the excess water off of it as per the instructions. And now, here's where we hope everything works. I'm going to apply the solution to the brush, and in even strokes I'm going to apply it to the metal. Now, if you don't cover everything the first time over, it's better to leave it and get it on the next coat, because otherwise you can get some blotching, and we don't want that in our finish. I'm essentially just going to coat that on. And the instructions say to allow about 30 seconds for the solution to dry, and it should be forming a coat of rust, which it does appear to be. So as soon as I see that solution dry, I'm going to put this back in the pot and come out with the next piece. Okay, the next piece that I'm going to go for here is the frame, and we are going to try to go a little heavier this time because I didn't see as much of the coat as I wanted to on the last piece. Compressed air makes this easier, but the paper towels will work. I'm going to have to figure out a good pattern to apply to this part, and I'm thinking we'll go across in stages, and we'll go down the back of the grip, go across, down, you get the inside also, and then we'll come across the barrel channel. Okay, now you see how it's already starting to get bright orange spots of rust. That is a good thing. That means the solution is working. It may just take a couple applications to really start working evenly. Trigger. The trigger is going to be an interesting one because it's a small piece and it's curved on the inside, so it's going to be difficult to apply evenly, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, and again we're just going to wait until the solution dries and plop it back in the water. Okay, now the instructions say to do that twice before we do any carding, so we're going to let those boil a couple minutes and be back. So right out of the solution we can see this is already turning blue. I like that. One thing I didn't think about, the red lacquer in the safety indicator is cooking out. I hope that doesn't affect anything, so I'm going to scrape that out of there before we put it back in. Second application time. Let's see what happens. Alright, now that mottled gray doesn't really look like much now, but I can tell you that's exciting to see because it means this formula is working very well, and we're going to probably get a nice satin blue finish out of this, which I'm excited to see. Second application time for the frame and the trigger. Got a nice good coating there. Gonna drop that back in the water. And the trigger starting to turn a little black as well. Alright, now we let them boil, and when we pull them back out, the next carding begins. I am starting to run out of memory on my card, and I don't really have the luxury to go and clear some, so I'm going to cut right here and we'll be back when something important happens. So we are back. I just pulled this out after the second application. It's starting to get that nice blue color that I like. So now here comes the fun part of the work. Going to take our carding brush that we mentioned earlier and scrub away the residue. Now anywhere we can't exactly get with the brush, it's okay. At the end, when we neutralize everything, or rather just before, I'll come in with some steel wool to hit any fine areas. Alright, so that finish is starting to look more and more blued. Now the instructions say that this may take 6 to 10 applications, so in the interest of saving memory, I'm going to keep repeating this, and I'll check back in with you guys once it's progressed some more. Before I do that, I should mention the next step is to reapply the formula and then place it back in the water to boil for at least 5 minutes. Okay, so this is the end of the 5th application, so let's see what kind of results we're getting. Starting to look nice and dark. So we're getting there. So I'm now here at application 6. I've just taken it out of the water and carded it. So the slide is now essentially what we would refer to as blued. It's starting to take less and less every time in the form of new rust. So this is approaching the point where we would consider this slide blued. Now I am seeing that the finish is a little uneven and it's still not quite as dark as I would like. So the next couple of applications, maybe between 3 and 5 more, are going to be about darkening the color and evening out the finish, and that's where we're going to go from here. Just wanted to note something else I've been doing as I've been having a harder and harder time getting the rust to develop, is applying the solution and letting it sit to dry, and then actively steaming the parts. Now steaming is another process that can be done for rust bluing. In fact, I'll put a link in the description to a video by CN Arsenal that shows how to do a rust blue process on a rifle with only a steamer and no boiling water immersion. But the steam, as we know, has a higher activation energy than the boiling water by itself. So what I'm experiencing, and what I believe is the reason, is the steam is catalyzing the oxidation process faster than the boiling water. So I don't know how this is going to affect the overall quality of the finish. As I said before, I've never tried this exact method in solution, so this is a little bit of experimentation, but it's something to think about if you're thinking about trying this at home. Okay, this is after 8 applications. I've left them in there for an extra amount of time, just to hopefully help convert the last of the red oxides. At this point, I'm not really seeing much more progress, so I think this is about the limit of what we're going to achieve this time around. So let's take them out. I'm going to card them and oil them, and we'll have an idea of how this worked for us. Okay, so here we are, out of the final boiling. Now, I know I told you that it wouldn't take any more rust, so don't worry about the orange that's on there. That's actually just sediment from being in the water. So now I'm going to take some quadruple aught steel wool and just a little bit of good old rem oil. Give them a good little spray and rub it down lightly with the steel wool. We don't want to go crazy. There's a bit of a glare, so I'm doing my best to capture the blue color without the reflection. But this is where we are now. So I am not unhappy with the color that we achieved. Now you notice, especially when it's reflected in the right light, you can see ups and downs in the pits and everything. So that's a good lesson for us as to why the metal prep is important. Now again, I'll probably do another project in the coming weeks, months, whenever I get time, to actually refinish a gun properly, starting with the metalworking, the filing, and the sanding. But in this case, the pits, to me, a little bit are part of the story of the gun. And the main focus here was getting a period correct bluing back on the gun to stop the corroding process and just clean it up a little bit and put it a little bit closer to the condition that it should have been in. So I'm going to do the same thing with the frame, and we'll take a look at that, and then we'll talk about what our last steps are going to be for this part of the process. And now here is the frame. So again, fighting a little bit of glare, but you can see that the frame has this kind of slate, charcoal black satin color. Now, of course, it's not a uniform satin finish for the reasons that we discussed, but this is the color that rust bluing is known for. Not so much the deep black pearl mirror-like finish of hot salt bluing, but a smooth satin to velvety kind of semi-gloss finish. So it's a very classy finish, and it's something that you see a lot on older guns, especially because it was widely used in the time period they were manufactured. So the next thing to do is to spray this with REM oil, and we're just going to let it cure for about 24 hours. Before I do that, I'll probably get a couple of pictures just so we can see the before and after and how far this gun has come. Okay, the last step is to apply the REM oil very liberally. We just want to soak this stuff in the REM oil, and we want to leave it to sit and cure for at least 24 to 48 hours. I don't know if there's any science behind the curing. I don't know if it's just a superstition we do that makes us feel better, but I've always cured in oil for at least 24 hours after bluing, and it really does seem to help solidify and set that last little bit of dark blue color. Now, when I say apply liberally, think Bernie Sanders and FDR liberal. Like you're applying the oil on somebody else's money. We just want to get that stuff in there and get it soaking. Normally after a hot bluing bath, I would actually soak in a tank of thick, heavyweight oil before this step, but this is what we have here at the home kitchen gun shop. Okay, now that I've gone above and beyond what any normal person would use in terms of oil, we're going to let that sit. And this is going to be the end of this part of the project. Next, we're going to reassemble the gun, make sure everything's in good working order, probably touch up the safety lever, the red lacquer that we had to remove. I have a stick of that from Brownells we'll replace that with. And then we'll take it to the range, which is everybody's favorite part. So, whether you followed along this project the whole time or you just came here for the bluing, I hope that you learned something and that you had fun watching the experience. If you have any feedback to share or questions, you can leave it in the comments or go to my Facebook page or website, Potts Precision and pottsprecision.com, respectively. Please do remember to subscribe and check out the website for more informational gun content, and I will see you in the next installment. Thank you.